Young drummers are 9 times out of 10 completely rock and roll drummers. Beginning drum books always start with rock. Private teachers, pretty unanimously rock players, unless they're lucky enough to be in a town with a big university or some sort of big jazz program somewhere. They're probably not getting education from private teachers on how to play jazz either. There's no TikTok jazz drummers for young kids. And frankly, kids really have no inspiration for jazz currently. There's nothing out there. So these kids learn how to play rock music, then they go into their junior high jazz band, and they're completely out of their element. Unless a director really knows what they're doing with drum set, a lot of times they don't help kids progress. And a lot of people will go through 8 years of this and still never really learn any difference, and they never learn how to play jazz. I know this is a really hard concept. For wind players, you play one note at a time. You do have a lot of articulations and a lot of different things to think about as your air support and everything, but the difference with drumming is that you will have 3 or 4 different sounds happening at the same time, and you as the drummer need to be like the engineer in the back mixing the sound. So you can't just beat the hell out of the bass drum. You got to be able to keep that bass drum quiet if you need to, or raise it up if you need to. And a lot of kids, when they come from a rock background, they only know how to hit as hard as they possibly can. So you as a director really need to help them learn how to play different styles, or if they get out of school, they're never going to be able to drum for anybody who actually calls for drummers with style. If you really have to think about the essential differences between rock and jazz, I always tell young kids, just think about beatboxing. If you beatbox a rock rhythm, and if you beatbox a jazz pattern, what do you say? For rock, boom, cat. Boom, boom, cat. Rock is the bass drum and the snare drum. That is what really drives the music. The jazz pattern is different. Rock is about drums, jazz is about cymbals. I'm going to go through each part of the drum set and talk about the difference in rock playing and jazz playing. That way you can help your drummers actually learn how to play different styles and not just play everything like a kid attempting to fake his way through jazz. Let's start off with the hi-hat. Now, I always say the hi-hat is the most important part of the drum set. I know I sound like a broken record, but it is. It's the timekeeper. It's what keeps everything in line. The drummer has got to lay on that 2 and 4 solid. I see high school kids who don't even play their hi-hat on 2 and 4. You have got to tell them to break everything down and just get that hi-hat. They first struggle with it, so they have a lot of trouble, and then they say, well, this is messing me up. I can't do this. I'm better without it. But once they get it down, it should become something that they don't even really think about. It's just off to the side of them, keeping time while they're doing everything else. What they need to do is keep their heel playing on quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lift it up to actually make the sound on 2 and 4. If they can keep quarter notes with their heel, that is going to keep them in tempo. If you have a kid who's all over the place with their tempo, that is why. They need to get that down. One exercise that's really good to have your drummers do is to just do that heel on quarter notes. You're going on the balls of your feet, and you're just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you get them to do that until it just becomes second nature. It's one of the best exercises you can ever do. It'll improve their tempo. The ride cymbal is probably the biggest misconception about jazz that I hear. People always say, that's what's keeping time. That's what's keeping the band going, and make sure you're laying on that heavy ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding. But the ride cymbal is really not the timekeeper. Your hi-hat is the timekeeper. The ride is helping keep time, but you don't want the ride to become stale. A lot of directors tell that kid 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1, 2, a 3 in their head, and they never let their kids variate from that. Yes, it's a good way to get started, but that's not really how they play. I guess I should go back and say that's not a good way to get started because it actually teaches a bad habit. The foundation of your ride pattern is quarter notes. Your kids should just be laying on quarter notes, and if they can do their hi-hat on 2 and 4 with the heel on the quarter notes and play their ride cymbal on quarter notes, and they can make that swing, they can play anything swing. A great exercise to have a kid do is have them play quarter notes with their ride, hi-hat on 2 and 4 with the heel on quarter notes, and just have them play on random uhs in the measure. That sounds more like a real jazz player than someone playing 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1. That sounds more like someone trying to speak a foreign language that they don't really know. Once they can get that down, a really good way to start bringing that exercise into really being able to play, start making 4 measure phrases. The first 2 measures I'm going to play on the of 3, and then the third measure, I'm going to play my normal pattern. I'm going to go back to that of 3. I'm going to try to do that. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, a 4, 1, 2, 3, a 4, 1, 2, a 3, 4, a 1, 2, 3, a 4. And then they can use that pattern, like in a blues where there's 12 bars, do that 3 times. That's really what really good jazz players can do. I'm still working on that, in all honesty. When you can really start processing and thinking through what you're actually playing and not just getting lost because you're zoning out, that's really a great thing to do, and it's starting to get your players to think about what they're doing. Make sure they're playing on the edge of the cymbal because that's where the sound comes from. If they're playing right in the middle of the cymbal, they're getting the high-pitched bell sound, they're getting the big washy edge sound and the middle sound. It's like too much noise happening at once. If you haven't seen my video on lunchroom noise on drum set and how to fix and clean up the sound, I'll have a link of that below. It helps them hear exactly what they're doing wrong. It also helps you not to have so much noise fatigue. I really think it's helpful, so I hope you watch that if you haven't already. Bass drum. So the bass drum. A lot of kids have a hard time with bass drum because they're so used to just laying on 1 and 3 with that. Boom, ka, boom, ka, as hard as they can. And I hear a lot of kids playing something that just sounds really rough. They just hit that bass drum way too hard. In jazz, you don't play bass drum on 1 and 3. I was guilty of that because I was so used to doing it, and you get that polka beat, boom chick, boom chick, boom chick. Originally, the bass drum was actually there to help the upright bass because before there was amplification, the bass wasn't loud enough to project out into the audience. They would do what we call 4 on the floor, which is where you play quarter notes with your bass drum, but you feather the bass drum. And people will always say you feel it more than you hear it. You're really just trying to create those sound waves. They're trying to create that low in sound for your ears to enjoy. But you don't want to think of it as this slamming bass drum that's hitting you in the head. Now times have changed. The bass does have amplification, so you don't really have to play 4 on the floor. So now it's more for accents. You'll play it on the uhs here and there. You'll accompany maybe like a trombone solely. But I will say there's been plenty of times in my life that the electric bass's amp goes out for a second. Something happens and they drop out of the music. I will start playing that 4 on the floor to get us through until they come back in. And it's really nice to know that that's really the tradition of it. Snare drum is a lot like bass drum as well, where people just are so used to playing 2 and 4 that they just beat the crap out of the snare drum on 2 and 4. Now remember, that's replaced by the hi-hat. The hi-hat's playing 2 and 4, and that's what's really keeping time for everybody. The snare drum, again, is really more for accents. It's more on the uhs. You know, if you're really hearing someone who's an authentic jazz player, you're going to hear them play with more finesse on the snare. You're not smacking it really hard. Now, just because you're playing quietly on the snare doesn't mean that you want to play on the edge of the snare. I see a lot of people, they'll play rock and they'll have it right in the middle, and then as soon as they start playing jazz, they bring it out to the edge of the drum and they start playing because they think it's lighter. But the problem is that there's no real snare sound and the audience really doesn't hear it. All it is just mudding up the sound. Another great exercise to have young drummers do is to have them play their ride pattern and their hi-hat. Try to put the snare drum on different uhs in the pattern. Have them try to play it on the of 1, then on the of 2, of 3, of 4. It's a great way to get them used to it and to get them out of just hacking at 2 and 4 all the time. Now, is there a place for playing on 2 and 4? I've had people say, never ever play on 2 and 4. That's not jazz. Don't do that. I will say I agree with that in an academic standpoint. When I was playing in college, yeah, I would probably never play on 2 and 4. It just didn't fit what we were doing. But being outside of college, playing in real, I shouldn't say real, I should say playing in paid groups, you will play on 2 and 4 for heavier sections. But this is bringing me into a whole other side of this that I really want to dive into, talking about dynamic ceilings. There's a great set of videos on YouTube of John Mayer speaking at Berkeley, and one of the things he talks about is dynamic ceiling. He talks about that with acoustic guitar because there's 6 strings. When he plays a song on acoustic guitar, he doesn't have the ability to turn on distortion or crank up the volume or change effects. He has one instrument with one sound. If you play all 6 strings loud and just start strumming, that is the loudest you can get on that instrument. And if you start a song out with that, that's it. That's all you got. You can't build from that. Same thing really happens with drum set in jazz. You are keeping time, but you're kind of helping build the sound with the rest of the band. You don't want to just come in right away playing 2 and 4 on your snare, hacking it out. It's a lot like having a saxophone player start every solo where they're playing screaming altissimo, and then just the whole 16 bar or 32 bars of soloing is just them screaming, 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 screaming. I mean, it's cool. I like screaming sax and, you know, and trumpet and stuff, but if that's the only thing they do and they do it for like 32 bars, I don't know if anybody really is going to enjoy that by the end of it, because they've given away everything they got in the first sound. Can't go anywhere from there. You want to start off lightly and build. And this is a real problem because drummers who don't understand how to build a song or how to move with the music, there's a problem right now that these people get praised a lot. Directors, when they have a kid who just goes nuts all the time and they're shredding their chops all the time, they're playing everything, they're filling constantly. Even when someone's soloing, they're playing on top of them. I see directors all the time just bragging about how good their drummer is. Oh man, this guy, he's nuts, killing it all the time. And I get it, because your audience is saying like,
oh man, that guy's killer, he's just crushing it.
The problem with that is that this kid is a hometown hero to them. They love him or her because they know them. They've watched them since 5th grade, a lot of these people, and they love seeing them tear it up. They love seeing their kids featured. But when they get into the real world where they're getting hired by a band and the guy needs a kid to play straight ahead jazz, straight ahead Latin, rock tune, or a power ballad, if that kid can't stop being the center of attention, they're never gonna get the call back. I play for several groups that there's really, really great drummers in the area who probably have better chops than me, but they don't get called back because I'll talk to the band leader. He'll say, every time I solo, they won't shut up. They just keep playing. They just keep putting themselves in front of me. And these kids graduate from school without any ability to have dynamics and to understand listening. I'm very lucky because I started out playing in church where we just had chord charts and we had to listen to everybody in the band. I didn't have music to read off of. If I started getting real crazy, someone would turn around and say, hey man, like, this isn't about you, you know, it's about the man upstairs and you need to calm down. And that was a really good lesson for me because I learned how to play emotionally and not play what I want to play. When I was a road rep, there were several towns that I would go to. Wow, these kids are like killer. Who knew this little town had such a great jazz band? And a lot of time it's because the drummer plays at church, the piano player plays at church, the guitar player plays at church, the whole rhythm section, they have the ability to listen to each other. Contemporary Christian music, you build a lot. It's all about dynamics. Those kids understand listening and playing dynamics and how to build and not just blast all the time. The last thing I'm going to cover is what we call setups and kicks. This is where your brass has a big loud hit and the drummer is playing along with them, but we call them setups because they're helping them feel the beat. I have actually had drum teachers tell me, oh, you know, this is actually, you just got to listen to jazz. I can't teach it to you. You just got to listen to it. I mean, that's not true. You can totally teach someone how to do a setup. My drum set teacher in college, actually before I got to college, was a clinician at one of the jazz festivals I was at. And he said to me, hey, those setups, it's like in concert band where the director takes a deep breath and goes, and starts the song. That's you. You are the breath before those hits. It really helped me understand the concept of like, oh, okay, I'm the one helping them know when to play. Gotcha. If you're trying to teach a kid how to do a hit, if they're playing anything on the you're going to do 2 beats before it. So if they're going to play on the of 4, you go 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry if it looked like, I hope it didn't look like I'm flipping off. I'm doing traditional grip. Sorry, with no sticks. Anyway, never mind. If they're playing on the beat, a lot of times just a clear and concise hit on the beat before it. They're playing on beat 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2 is a really good way to do it. A lot of high school kids come from drum lines, so they want to do all these fancy things. They'll do a big flam. Also, I see a lot of people do a roll into it. Yeah. Again, you don't need to do the roll. The roll, I know for you, you feel like you have that drumline experience, you want to play a roll or some fancy thing, but it doesn't really help them hear it better. All that does is muddy up the sound, and it's really for your own ego. It's not really for your players, because it's not helping them hear it clearer by having a drag or a little grace note before it. That's something I struggled with a lot in college. My director would say, don't do the flam. Stop doing the flam. It's not, you don't need to do that. It's not helping the sound. And I realized, yeah, you're right, it doesn't. The last bit of advice I can give, which is what you hear at every single jazz clinic you've ever been to. If you can't go to a jazz clinic this year, let me quickly just do a jazz clinic. How many of you listen to jazz? Raise your hand. Oh, none of you. You should listen to jazz. Oh, one person listens to jazz? Let me talk to you for the rest of the time. Ignore every other kid here. But really, you should get kids to listen to jazz. You should inspire them to play. This is not a dock on my old director or anything, but the person who actually helped me learn about jazz was my PE teacher. I always carried drumsticks everywhere I went. Kind of weird like that, I guess. My PE teacher would always criticize me and say like,
hey, you can't keep carrying those sticks or you're going to hurt yourself.
Oh, sorry, I carry them, you know, that's what I do. When I started calling me Gene Krupa. Who's Gene Krupa? He got real serious and I was like,
you don't know who Gene Krupa is? You're a drummer.
Who's Gene Krupa?
He's the greatest drummer of all time.
Oh. Okay.
Go home tonight, look up on YouTube, and find Gene Krupa.
I don't even know if YouTube was around then. I don't know. I think it was. So I went online, and I just typed in Gene Krupa, and I started discovering who Gene Krupa was. And I listened to Sing, Sing, Sing for the first time, and I started trying to play that tom pattern. And it's what really got me into jazz drummers, because I didn't know jazz drummers. My director never told me anything about jazz drummers. And it was my PE teacher who luckily inspired me to get into jazz. Please let me know if there's any other questions you have. I want to help you and answer them for you. I'm not real great about this social media stuff, and I know I'm supposed to tell you guys to comment below, and we're in the middle of the quarantine right now, and this is my quarantine haircut. Did it myself, so let me know how my hair looks. Look good? It's about the only thing, you know, I'm very proud of. But it's not fair because I actually have been cutting my hair a year now, so I was prepared for this. I hope that helped you get some insight into the differences between rock and jazz. Next, I'm going to talk about how to really read a drum chart. If your drummer comes up and asks you a question, you really know what you're looking at. You know how to help them through it. See you next time.